The one question that I've been asked the most in the last 28 years as a mechanic is, Alan, what sort of oil should I be putting in my engine? What sort of oil should go in my back end? What sort of hydraulic oil should I use? Well, there's a lot of myths out there about oil and what you should and shouldn't be using, and what the actual figures on the bottles and that all mean. So today in this video, we're going to try and explain just some of that and give you a little bit of a heads up and an idea of what oil you should be putting into your particular machine. Good afternoon or good morning, whatever time it is when you're watching this. You're very welcome back to the Agri-Motive Farm Machinery YouTube channel. Yeah, so today we're talking about oils, engine oils and hydraulic oils in particular. So what oil should you put into your machine? Well, when someone asks me that, I always say, well, what does the manufacturer recommend? Take out your handbook and have a look. What spec does it advise for your particular engine or your particular transmission? Now, it will vary across manufacturers. All manufacturers will have differences. Some will be the same. Some do things differently. You have different quantities, you have different specs, you have different grades. And it also depends on where you're living in the world. So if you're living in a colder climate, if you're living up in Norway, or if you're in a cold climate, as opposed to if you're in Africa with your machine, wherever you are, the grades that you're going to use are going to be slightly different. I will explain that in a minute. So yeah, that's the first thing I always say to someone is, depends on what the manufacturer recommends. That's the oil to put into your particular engine, and that covers me. If there's anyone comes back and say, well, you told me to put in whatever, and now my engine's fucked. Well, I told you to put in what the manufacturer recommends, and that is, as a mechanic, that is the safest way to protect yourself. And obviously as an owner as well, you want to put the best oil into your engine that you can find. So I know, what is an engine oil? Why is it there? Well, obviously it's there to lubricate, it's there to cool, it's there to act as a sealant, so it stops dust from getting in around the engine, past seals and stuff like that, crankshaft seals. It actually acts as a seal. It acts as a dampener, so dampening and cushioning of impact inside in the engine. It protects from high stress, and also it protects from corrosion, because it will coat the inside of your engine or your transmission or whatever, and it will stop air and oxygen from getting to it and causing it to corrode. So yeah, when we look at different types of engines, so we have to start back. So I'm assuming people watching this, maybe most of you might have machines, you might have tractors from the 60s, from the 70s, right through up onto modern machines. Now there is a variation across the years as to what type of oils we should be recommending. So when we look at an oil itself, and we look at the bottle, and someone says, Alan, it says 15W40. So what does 15W40 mean? Well, 15W40 is only a viscosity grade of that oil. It tells you absolutely nothing about what the oil is, what type of oil it is, what its properties are. All it tells you about is its viscosity. And what viscosity is an oil resistance to flow. So that's all it is. So when you look at a 15W40, 15W is W is winter, so that's a multi-grade oil. So it's recommended down to 15 degrees in the winter, 40 degrees in the summer. So why would you want a different grade? So if you're in someplace like Norway, if you're in a colder climate, you want that oil first thing in the morning when it's cold to still be viscous, to be able to, when you're starting the engine, it's not causing too much of a drag on the engine, that it's going to pump pretty easily on a cold start, because that's when the most damage is done. The minute you crank that key, that's when the most damage is done, because the oil overnight will have flowed and sat down in the sump of the engine. Now in colder conditions, it's going to be more viscous. It's going to be thicker, and it's going to flow a lot slower. And when you start it up in the morning, it's going to be harder to get it going, to get the oil moving around. Now the opposite is in warmer climates. So when you look at a warmer climate, if you've got a viscosity that's 15 in a warmer climate, it's going to be very, very viscous in the mornings, or when the engine is cold and you've got an outside temperature maybe of 40 degrees, that oil is going to be very, very viscous. So when you try and start the engine, yeah, you're going to get oil pressure, you're going to get good oil flow straight away, but overnight in the heat and that, the oil would have drained, all the oil would have drained from the cylinder walls, it would have completely drained out of the engine. You might be left with a very, very light coating on the cylinder walls, and that's where it's most important. So if you've got like a 15W40 or higher in a hotter climate, the oil is actually going to cling to the side of the engine. So it's going to stay there and it's going to create a coating. So that's why we use different viscosities in different countries. In Ireland, we're very lucky that, we don't have extremes of weather. So the oil that we have, we will get away with a 10W30, 10W40 or a 15W30 or 15W40. Now, when someone says, you shouldn't be using 15W40, you should be using, it makes absolutely no difference really in this country. It makes no difference. Once you have the right spec, the spec is not viscosity, spec is what the actual specification of the oil is. So if we take a tractor that's, say, pre-2004, so that'd be like, you'd be getting on before DPF, you might have an EGR valve, the tolerances inside the engine, that's not common rail, tolerances inside the engine are going to be, not as, strict as they would be on the modern engines. They're a little bit looser and whatever. So you'll get away with, a standard E5 15W40, any decent brand of oil, 15W40 pre-2004, no problems whatsoever. Moving on from that then, when we move up our tiers, so our tier 3 and tier 4, so when you get to tier 4 engines, we're looking for an oil that has less ash in it. So a low SAPS oil, it's called. So the ash content of the oil needs to be lower. That's to, so it doesn't clog up your DPF, clog up your EGR. It's a cleaner, much cleaner. Now it is obviously, it's more expensive, but it is much cleaner. Now you'll get it in the same viscosity. You'll still get your 15W40 in an E7, and that has to generally be semi-synthetic. So you get an E7 in a semi-synthetic oil, that's perfectly fine for a tractor from, say, 2004 onwards. There's no harm then putting it in an older tractor as well. Older tractors, you'll get away with 15W40 standard oil. Now, you can also use what's called a universal tractor transmission oil, where you'll get the one tank and you'll be able to use the same oil for your front end and your back end. But as the tractors get up in year and the engines become that little bit more, complicated, and they're a little bit more finicky as in terms, your EGR systems and your DPF and your SCR, it is very important to have a very specific type of oil. So from 2010 onwards, you really need to be looking at an E9, E7 or E9 oil, depending on what machine you have and what the, whether it's AdBlue, whether it does or doesn't have AdBlue, or it has an SCR in it. So you really need to, that's where you need to pay attention to what your, your dealer, or call your mechanic once they know what they're talking about. Whatever the manufacturer recommends that you use for that tractor or machine, digger, whatever it is, that's what you should use. That's what I'd be advising. Now, you can look at this oil. Say there's an oil there. So there's Gulf, and no, I'm not sponsored by Gulf, it's just an oil that I happen to have. PowerTrack 4T 10W40. Would you put that into your tractor? No, you wouldn't. Why? Because that's a motorcycle oil. Now it's 10W4, but it's 10W40. It's got the same viscosity. Nothing got to do with viscosity, as we know, is only the oil's resistance to flow under different temperatures. The makeup of that oil, because for a motorcycle engine, is completely different than it would be in, say, a diesel engine, because the properties are completely different. So its viscosity will be, relatively the same. Its thermal stability will be completely different. Its oxidation stability will be completely different. Its demulsification and its flash point will be completely different, because they're going into two completely different engines. 4-stroke motorcycle engine running at 16,000 RPM, as opposed to a heavy diesel engine running at 2,500 RPM. I wouldn't put that into a tractor, because Mightn't do any harm. It's better than nothing, but I wouldn't be filling my tractor up with that. So yeah, that's the important thing to know when you pick up a can of 15W40 or 10W30 or whatever it is. They're not all the same. Have a look and see, is it E5, is it E7, is it E9? You don't need to put an E9 oil into a pre-2004 because they're just wasting money. Now, it is clean oil. It's going to keep your engine clean. It'll be perfectly fine, but it would be overkill and it would be twice the price as well. Moving on from that then, I suppose, when you look at your back end oils. So your back end oil, then your transmission oil. So you have to look at your transmission and your hydraulic. The vast majority of farm machinery tractors out there would use the same oil for the transmission and the hydraulics. So what you have to have is, in the back end, you have to have an oil that is, it's able to withstand great pressure. It's able to withstand great heat because it's running through a hydraulic pump that's, running quickly. It has to do all the things the engine oil does in regards to being a coolant, being able to suspend particles in the oil to take it away and into the filter for cleaning. So it'll take that dirt away from the back end and it'll take it towards the filter where it's cleaned out. When you move on up the years to the newer machines, you're going to have a separate, as we said, we've got a very specific oil for our modern tractors with DPF and SCR, and our back end will be a standalone, probably an 80W tractor hydraulic transmission oil that will do, it'll do everything in the back end. There are some machines out there that would have a separate transmission and hydraulic system, separate oil. I know Fendt is one of them. There are others that would use separate, different oils in the back end. Again, manufacturer, caveat, you just have to be, you can't be too careful. Just don't take the word of the lad over the counter that's trying to sell you, the lad that picked up the phone and says, I've got this oil here, do you want to throw it in? Or don't run and get a can of something that you don't know what it is and put it into it, because, it's a recipe for disaster. So anything that is from 2004 on, I'd recommend specific oil for the engine, specific oil for the back end, an 80W for the back end, that'll do your hydraulics and your transmission. Then moving on, I suppose you have your hubs on the front. A lot of them will work on the 80W as well, or it could be a gear oil, 80W90. Your front diff, then some of them actually have a limited slip diff, so you'd have clutch packs in it. So I went out to a tractor once, I think it was a 7810. So when he had it on full lock, the tractor was skipping. For all in the world, you'd think there was a universal joint gun on the front of it. Yeah, there's a universal joint gun, but it was actually, they had serviced the tractor themselves and they put the wrong oil into the diff. So it wasn't what we call an LS, so a limited slip, generally an LS90 into the front of a 7810 or something with clutch packs in it. So we drained the oil, took the discs out, cleaned them, put them back in, put the right oil in, took it for a drive, and it was perfect. So it's vitally important to make sure that you're putting the correct oil in. And again, if you're unsure, ask. So the front hubs then, 80W or a gear oil. After that, as regards the engine, there's not a lot, or the back end as the tractor itself, there's not a lot else. The one app that I found very handy, now most oil manufacturers will have an app where you can go on and you can select your machine. So you can either put in the registration, it'll give you a list of cars, it'll give you a list of boats, some aircraft, depending on the brand of oil, trucks, light commercial vehicles, and off highway, so tractors and then plant machine. So go in, you pick out your machine. So in this instance, I went in on the Fuchs oil is one that I use a lot. So because it's free, some of them charge you. You have to subscribe to them, to their emails, to be able to access their oil finders or whatever. So you go in, pick out your machine. This particular one, 7530, picked out what model it is. I can go in, I can look up, that's how much oil it needs. That's what oil it recommends. And then down into the drop boxes, you can go and look at your diffs and your transmission, your coolant, everything is there. So they are very handy. So if you log on to the Fuchs website, you just go in, put your machine in. If you're ever in doubt, put it in. Now, we'll give you their brand of oil. It'll give you what brand, it'll give you their Fuchs, it'll give you what day, they're not going to tell you to put a Castrol into it or whatever. So, but it is a good way of finding out, especially if you need to know the capacity, because you could be looking at a capacity of maybe 70 or 80 litres in the back of a tractor or something. So it's always handy to know how much oil do I actually need, and they are very good for that. One thing I would obviously recommend is always try and buy a branded oil. And when I say a branded oil, something like Gulf. Now Gulf make the oil themselves. You do get people selling oil that it's in a lovely package, but they don't actually make the oil. They're buying it off whoever. They're buying it off different manufacturers, be it in India or wherever. They're putting it into their container, they're putting their label on it, but they haven't actually made the oil. And these oils generally wouldn't have. No, they'll meet the spec. They'll say a GL4 or whatever, or an E7. They'll meet the specifications, but they will not be approved. So they won't be manufacturer approved. So what the major oil companies like Gulf and Fuchs, Castrol, Elf, any of the major oil manufacturers, what they will do is they will create a blend of oil to suit whatever specifications that, say, Case have set out for their FPT engines. And they will go and say, yep, we've made this oil. I'm giving it over to you, test it, and tell me, does it meet the approval? So the manufacturer of the engine will go off and say, yeah, we've done all the tests. It meets the standard, and we'll approve this oil for use. Now, to get the approval, it's a certificate, it's a sheet of paper. I've got loads of them inside, but that costs money. That could be, to get an approval, it could be millions, So that is why when you go and buy something like a Gulf or an Elf or a Fuchs, they are more. They're always going to be more expensive than your standard, oil that just has a label on it that could have potentially came from anywhere. So yeah, it's always important to, especially if your tractor, your machine, whatever it is under manufacturer's warranty. It's always important to make sure that you have the approvals. So moving on from that, then the last thing to look, I suppose, from an agri-related point of view, is your hydraulic oils. Now, hydraulic oils, generally you think of them when used to, using a piston or, runs through a pump and it, works a piston or whatever, and that's grand. They also come in different viscosities. So your standard hydraulic oil for, a gearbox that might be running slow or whatever, that's your H32. So your hydraulic 32 will be a very popular oil. It would have the viscosity is obviously 32. That's what the 32 means. It's used in for light duty applications, gearboxes and bearings. Moving on from that, then you have your 46. So it's the same as above. It just has a different viscosity level. Moving on from that, then you have your HV46. So when you see the H, that is for high temperature. So that would be running through something that's running continuously. So that oil is being continuously ran through a pump. So say on the chopper on the front of a potato harvester is ran hydraulically, that pump is running constantly, could be running for 12, 14, 16 hours a day. The same hydraulic oil is running through it the whole time. It's coming back, it's going through a cooler, it's going again. So that's where you want like a HV46, something that's going to be able to take that high temperature. Because remember, the 46 only, it's only a measure of viscosity when it's at, room temperature. Moving on from that, then you've got 46 and you've got 68. You can get the lighter and lighter hydraulic. I think 68 is probably there's just a 68 grade oil, but as you can see, 68 viscosity, but that's a milking machine oil. You're not putting that into any hydraulic system. That's for vacuum pumps. That's a different oil again. So yeah, there is a lot of differences. Remember the grades, that the number you'll see in the front, that's only the viscosity. It says nothing about what the type of oil is, what the oil is, what it does, what it's good for. Someone could give you that and say, yeah, there's 68 grade oil. You should put that into your hydraulic system. It will be grand. It won't be grand. Make sure you use the right oil. So that's really it. You cannot be safe enough when it comes to using oils. Obviously, it goes without saying when you're changing the oil on your on any of your machines or combines or harvesters, whatever it is, you know, it might seem like, yeah, I'm buying 1,000 litres, but I can buy it off him for $2,000, whereas he's 2,300. You know, I'll buy the cheaper oil. It's not improved, but yeah, I'll get away. It'll be grand. You know, that €300 could be the difference between a hydraulic pump going, you know, as opposed to not. And that could be a machine down for 2 days and the price of a hydraulic pump. So I would always encourage people as much as possible to where they can afford it to use a good quality branded oil from someone that produces the oil. And then it goes without saying as well, when you're draining oil, use best practice. You know, if you drain out of 25, 30 litres out of a tractor, you know, you'll see lads putting it into a can, throwing it on a load of bushes and burning it. You know, it's, you know, you would have got away with that in the 70s and the 80s and 90s even. You know, that's grand, you know, but the times that we're living in now, I just would encourage people to be as responsible as possible with their waste fluids and their waste filters as well. So Enva is a company that I would deal with. So Enva would, you have a contract with them. They take all the waste oil, take the waste filters, and even the oily rags as well. They're supposed to be disposed of in a, you know, a safe manner, because they are, oily rags piled up on top of each other are actually flammable, and especially if they come near a heat source. So yeah, try and be as responsible as possible with what you're doing with your oil. Try not to let it spill on the ground. You know, if you do have a spill, try not to sweep it down a drain. Try to clean up after yourselves, and it'll certainly keep the council off the farmers' backs and mechanics' backs. And you know, it's nice to walk into a place and see something that's it's well organised and nice, clean, tidy workshop where everything is in place and there's not buckets of waste oil lying around the place getting spilled and, you know, the cat or the dog out licking out of it. But yeah, look, that's it for the oil. If anyone has any questions, if they're unsure of anything, if they need a little bit of help with any specific machines, there are some machines that are a little bit tricky. There's different type systems within machines. Your Caterpillars, especially your TO4 oils and stuff like that. If they need any advice, don't hesitate to ask in the comments. If you want to contact me, just Google Agri-Motive Farm Machinery. You will find my phone number. Feel free to give me a call and to reach out. I'm always looking for new business. So yeah, that's it. Hope you found this helpful. It's just a little something to add to the week, and I will see you all at the weekend. Thanks, guys.